8 o'clock tonight.
Thought their country should be run by a king who himself believed that he was chosen by God. On the other hand, there were those who thought that a parliament should have the final say in the rule of the land. In time, it might even be a parliament chosen by the people. After years of arguing about who had the ultimate authority, in the autumn of 1642, King Charles I and Parliament stopped talking and started fighting. The Civil War began, the balloon went up. Now, someone who got most of his history from textbooks, a hot air balloon is something of a treat, but there are some lucky historians who do this all the time. They call it aerial archaeology. And from the air, you can sometimes see traces of the lost centuries outlined by the way the crops grow or the way the sunlight falls. Imagine a great big football field with bilberry bushes and the odd marsh. Just right for fighting a battle, because the flatter it is, the better. In 1644, 40,000 soldiers from the 4 nations of the British Isles fought on this field of battle. Picture them now, the king's men mustering to the north of what the crop markings still tell us was a ditch. The parliamentarians were to the south, and from evening until midnight, they fought below. At first, the royalists had the upper hand, then the parliamentarians. And such was the chaos and confusion that for many hours the parliamentary forces didn't know that they'd won. Today, much of the evidence of victory and loss lies buried beneath the ploughed landscape, but happily we can still unearth the written memories of one who came to fame on Marston Moor. We never charged, but we routed the enemy. God made them as stubble to our swords. Your truly faithful and loving brother, Oliver Cromwell.
Stubble to our swords. Pip Miller isn't the only actor trying to unearth the facts about the English Civil War. I'm Alan Lewis, and I play a farmer turned parliamentary captain called Thomas Palmer. Now, in our case, we're lucky. Pip's a royalist, I'm parliamentarian. We know what roles we'll be playing. But for many in the Civil War, things were not quite so clear. When king and parliament fight, which of your rulers do you support? And in the midst of war, how do you hang on to your property and your place in society? Because, of course, in the chaos of wartime, the poor and the powerless could easily seize power. So, people who had something to keep wanted to keep it. They wanted to keep their principles, their property, and at the very least, their wealth.
Back in November 1991, Wesley Westerman was digging a drain. He was staying on a North Yorkshire farm, very like that which my character would have owned. But, as Wesley revealed to coin expert Craig Barclay, the drain suddenly turned into a treasure trove.
I was digging and I sat down, had a break, and noticed something in the mud. And I picked it up and rubbed the dirt off. I thought, this looks like some sort of old coin. So I thought, no, it must be bluffing. So I tried to snap it, not believing it, and then had a look around and it didn't break, and found a few more and put them in my pocket.
Did you find any trace of a container in which they might have been concealed as well?
Well, we did actually find a little piece of pot, what could quite possibly have been contained in. We're not sure, we haven't as yet found any more.
Right.
301 coins were finally found at the bottom of Wesley's drain, minted in the reigns of 4 Tudor and Stuart monarchs, each coin a clue to history.
How would I find out when the coins were buried?
Well, we can never be certain, but we can assume with some degree of certainty that the coin hoard itself was buried sometime shortly after the last coins were struck. The parliamentarians had control of the mint in London and struck coins there to pay their own armies. The king needed to strike coins elsewhere to pay his soldiers, and this is the sort of coin that was struck. You see a very fine portrait of Charles I on the coin. If you look at the one next to it, you can actually see the name of the mint itself. It's just underneath the hooves of the horse. You can see the 4 letters EBOR.
EBOR.
short for Iberacum, the old name of the city of York. That represents a time when Roundheads and Cavaliers were fighting in this part of Yorkshire, and the possibility exists that the hoard was buried in the period immediately before the decisive battle at Marston Moor.
So, was the owner Roundhead or Cavalier?
A very good question. He might have been a Roundhead who buried his money before going off to Marston Moor and never came back to collect it. He might have been a supporter of the Cavaliers who farmed here and hid his money from the Roundheads when they came. He may even have been a citizen who had no interest whatsoever in the politics of the war, but simply buried his money to protect it from the people on either side who might have wanted to take it.
So how would I begin to find out more about the owner?
Normally, it's very difficult, but here we're very lucky that they've been found next to this really marvellous old house. And this is a house which has actually been standing for several hundred years. And by good chance, this is a copy of a deed, and it relates to this particular property. And it's dated 1642, up in the corner. Now, the nice thing about it is you can actually see, the name Richard Bain, who's the person who took up this lease in 1642. And was almost certainly the person who was living in this very house at the time that the coins were buried.
So why do you think the coins weren't dug up?
I think the most likely explanation is that whoever it was that buried them died or was disabled or was prevented in some way by, I don't know, fleeing from being able to return to the place where he concealed them. I think he certainly intended to dig them back up, and the great question, and in this case the great unanswered question, is why he didn't do that.
Why, indeed. The answer may well lie in the Civil War. A war fought with weapons like this. A pikestaff, a full 4 meters in length. Imagine being charged by a giant hedgehog. And it's easy to imagine, because when we made this program on the 350th anniversary of the Civil War starting, Britain bristled with Civil War exhibitions. Even the Royal Armouries, normally locked up in the Tower of London, toured an exhibition to several cities embroiled in the Civil War. They took weapons and armour to museums like this one in Nottingham Castle. But just in case we thought the Civil War was all about men in armour on horseback, here in Nottingham they devised another exhibition. The Weaker Vessel is about women in the Civil War. So side by side we have two viewpoints of history. Let battle commence.
The expansion of the armaments industry in the Civil War was tremendous, and an enormous number of people are under arms. I mean, it's been reckoned that about 1 in 4 men actually fought or bore arms in the Civil War. Enormous number of people who had to be armed. If you're a nobleman or a gentleman, you will have a family armoury, perhaps. You'll certainly have your own armour, very likely passed down, more than 1 or 2 generations old, because of course Englishmen in general had not taken part in the war for a very long time. There were also local armouries or magazines which stored armour for the militia. So there was armour available off the shelf, and very quickly, of course, the armourers set to work, speeded up production. Armour was imported and became available, but even so there was always a shortage, and people improvising and making do. And there are examples even of medieval helmets, which have been turned into Civil War helmets.
Well, how do you feel in that?
It's very heavy.
It's very heavy, yes. The fact is, though, that during the war,
A lot of soldiers just stopped wearing armour. A lot of pikemen stopped wearing armour because it was so uncomfortable and heavy. All the time, it's a competition between the weapon maker and the armourer. Each is trying to outsmart the other. The weapons look very primitive. I mean, you're either cutting people or trying to push something through them, or you're trying to blow some gunpowder off in their face. You know, the reality of a 17th century battle was it was really pretty primitive and brutal. But at the same time, of course, if these things were going to be used effectively, the men had to be drilled, they had to do things together and in unison, otherwise the weapons weren't effective. You had to have a whole row of musketeers firing at the same time and another lot coming on to fire a minute after, otherwise it had no effect on the enemy, since you couldn't be sure of hitting anybody at more than 40 yards. Similarly with the pikeman, one man with a long spear on his own is better off without it. So you needed a lot of pikemen all lined up in the proper formation. And then you see how they did their best to get their soldiers disciplined, how they got them psyched up for combat.
On the other side of the battle, historian Sasha Roberts is investigating the weaker vessel.
So we've got a situation where there's no female soldiers, no female politicians. Women are considered weak, but do you think that the men could go to battle without the help of their women?
No.
Why do you think that might be?
Without the women, they wouldn't have any food.
They wouldn't have food.
The women looked after all their children and everything. Yeah.
So they kept everything...
They kept everything running.
How can we begin then to try and find out about women and children in the war? Where would you begin to look?
In books and manuscripts.
In manuscripts. Now we've got one woman's manuscript coming up here, I hope. If I can summon Lucy Hutchinson. She's Colonel Hutchinson's wife. She lived in the castle here during the civil wars. Now, Laura, can you read any of this? Especially try from this paragraph here.
Presently after the Cavaliers were gone out of the town, some naughty people set on by them fired the town, but it was quenched without burning about 2 or 3 houses. Yet for a fortnight, the women were forced to walk by 50 in a night.
Right. She says women had to go out and guard the hay barns, about 50 hay barns a night, to make sure that they weren't set fire upon. So what does a passage like that tell us about what women may have done in Nottingham during the civil wars?
Well, they would have told us that women had to guard the city, and they had to rise over people who were doing horrible things.
Right. Is that something that you'd expect? Would you expect women to be guarding the city like that? You wouldn't. So who would you expect guarding the town?
The husbands.
The husbands and the men. So do you think it's important to know these things?
Yes.
Why?
Because if we didn't, we wouldn't know about how they used to live, and you wouldn't really have a history.
You wouldn't have a history. But for many, many years, we hadn't known very much about what women and children and their families had done.
Exhibitions are a good way of exploring history, but nowadays, many people feel that the best way to find out about the Civil War is to live the part. These cavalry are mustering at Worcester for what's described as the biggest British battle on horseback since the 17th century. It recalls the Battle of Powick Bridge, one of the first of the Civil War. Like all historical reconstructions, we should test it against the facts. But these enthusiasts believe that in fighting and in making things to fight, they found a way of understanding history.
I think the most important thing really is that we try to live as soldiers in the mid-17th century. We do research it very, very carefully. We try to be as authentic as we possibly can, in that we would use real leather, good hide, good steel, and quite a few talented people have developed the art of making things like buff coats, steel helmets, swords, and so we get the feel of the genuine materials.
It's only since I've become involved in the English Civil War Society that I've actually realised just how much true research can be done by people like myself, who can actually go and look at the things themselves. And in fact, from my research, I've found that the archaeological digs are more likely to produce items such as, the Mary Rose collection, of ordinary, everyday wooden items, things that people could actually use. But in fact, when I started doing it, which was about 18, 20 years ago, I had this sort of comprehension of Roundhead of the Cavaliers all dressed up in fine clothes, and that everything would have to be chunky and, sort of poorly made. Everything sort of rather gashly made by hand. But in fact, they weren't. They were very good craftsmen.
As you can see, I'm working here on a 17th century bucket-top boot, which is in quite a demand today as we're at a cavalry battle, because this is the sort of thing that a lot of the cavalry would be wearing. What we have to work with is, one, archaeological evidence, what's actually been found at these sites which exist, and also then there's museum evidence, And the other one, of course, is literary evidence and evidence that comes to us from art. I'm not an academic at all. I'm a practitioner, I'm a worker. So therefore, everything has to have practical value. So all my lessons in history have all been learned by practical application.
What I like to do is to make things. So if I want to make something, what I then do is try and get as much research. It was quite a cosmopolitan place, the 17th century. So you had Dutch pots, Italian pots, German pots, all arriving in England. Then all you do is look around at the best of the 17th century, and all you do is copy it. But then when you come to use the pot, you realise that the curve over on the top of a bowl is so that as you bring the spoon up, that little curve flicks things back onto the spoon. So you're not chasing your peas all around the place. You know, the shape of the pot is there for a purpose.
By September 1642 in England, the purpose of almost everything had turned to war. Few trades and few countrymen could escape the grim ranks of king or parliament. It was the time for choosing. It was the time for each to play his role.
I am Sir John Warren of Hawthorpe. I own an estate rich in timber and ironstone, and in time my son Ralph will inherit it, and himself bring well-being to those who would labour on my land. These were my hopes before this cleaving war. But now my son Ralph, he to whom my life has been devoted, has ridden off with Prince Rupert's Cavalier army. I do not deny that someone must fight those rebels who would force the king to submit to Parliament, but must it be my son? And must a death in battle be his ending?
I am Thomas Palmer of Westmore, compelled at last to rebel against my king. Time was when a struggle for power in far-off London was small matter to a Yorkshire farmer. And now we are all drawn to defend our liberty. Why should the king and bishops order our ways of worship? Why should the king pillage our pockets with strange new taxes? Taxes not voted by Parliament, but by himself invented. Why should he demand ship money to defend our ports, when we know full well he uses it to raise armies to attack his own people?
I'm a king's man, to my boots. And though there are times when his royal blessings have cost me plenty, yet I dare not allow my loyalty to waver. For consider the prospect. If the lower orders are encouraged to rebel against their natural rulers, if a king be overthrown, may not the bishops, may not the nobility be next? Where will it end?
Where will it end? This silencing of those who dare protest against the king's unlawful measures. Honest men must be free to speak their inner minds. It is for this free trading of truth that I take up arms against a tyrant king.
And thus in arms and for this king, I bid my son farewell. He is right to fight the dark forces which even now are mustering for a world turned upside down.
To end this tyranny of lawless kingship, I fight that my children may grow under just government. I entrust my wife and family to the care of Almighty God, and leave them tending our farm with tireless courage. And in their tending, may they pray for my safe return. And may God grant that our victory be swift and sure.
Aye, truly. Swift and sure, let be our victory.
£2